The United States has carried out a drone strike against the militant group responsible for the attack on Kabul Airport that left more than 100 people dead. US Central Command claims that the target, a member of the group known as ISK, was killed. The strike took place in Afghanistan's Nangarhar province. The US said it was not aware of any civilian casualties. The Pentagon is now bracing for retaliatory attacks and has warned that the coming days could be the most dangerous in its withdrawal operation, which is due to end on Tuesday. Let's cross straight now to journalist Franz Marti in Kabul for the latest on the situation. Franz, what more can you tell us about that overnight US drone strike on the suspected IS terrorists?
Details are still unclear. The drone strike apparently hit a house in Police District 7 in Jalalabad. I have talked to a source who has links to militants in Jalalabad, but there have been no clear details emerging how many people died or who was exactly in the house. I will still follow this up, but at the moment, no one knows exactly, apparently.
OK, Franz, now we're going to talk about the situation at Kabul Airport in just a moment, so stay with us while we have a look at this report about the many people who are still desperate to leave Afghanistan.
A long list of those injured at Kabul Airport. Many Afghans have come to this hospital to look for their loved ones, who didn't come home after the suicide bombing.
We searched all over, went to every hospital, and finally we found his name on the list here. He's 19 and wants to go to the US.
The evacuation flights continue at Kabul Airport for now, but the American soldiers let only a few people through their checkpoint, and the Taliban closed the streets around the airfield. Before the attack, these roads were packed. A day later, those same thoroughfares are deserted. The refugees are now thronging downtown Kabul. This family wants to flee to Germany, even though its evacuation flights have ceased. One of them has a German visa. We have been here for a week. We sold everything. They didn't let us into the airport. No one checked our papers. People without visas are to blame for the chaos. More and more people are also trying to cross Afghanistan's border with Pakistan. The Pakistanis are only letting people with visas through. Everyone else is being turned away.
We have seen in recent weeks a great deal of population movement when the conflict and the insecurity came to people's doors. So we have around 500,000 people who've been forced to flee their homes, often with nothing in their hands.
The UN wants Pakistan to let Afghans without visas cross the border. It's also planning to deliver food from these crossings, as Afghanistan faces a humanitarian crisis.
OK, back to Franz Marti in Kabul. Franz, the US is warning of more terrorist attacks in the coming days or even hours. What does that mean for the crowds waiting outside Kabul Airport?
Warnings have been issued since a few days already, a few days before the attacks. They have become more severe, but there are no details shared on what exactly might happen. US officials have talked about possible rocket attacks or attack with a car bomb. But details are unclear. In general, the situation is not much different than before. That there was a threat of attack by the self-declared Islamic State was already before the case. It is also now, so it can't be ruled out that they do something. On the other hand, if they would have had immediate capability, it would be more likely that they would have staged like 2-3 attacks in short concessions. So it's really hard to say. There is a threat, but it might not be as big as some assume.
Franz, can you tell us who is in control of the airport now? The Taliban said they'd taken over parts of the area. The US military says that's not true. What are you hearing?
Yeah, it is complex. So yesterday night, the Taliban have published photos of their so-called special forces going into the airport, taking over certain positions. This has apparently happened, but as far as I can tell, this is part of the soon-to-come handover. So the Taliban haven't taken control of the whole airport, just of certain parts inside the airport where they haven't been before. And this seems to have been done in coordination with the Americans.
OK, Franz Marti in Kabul, thanks so much for your reporting. And for more on the group known as Islamic State-Khorasan, or ISK, I'm joined now by Jan St. Pierre, a counter-terrorism policy consultant here in Germany. Jan, thanks so much for your time. Can you tell us how big of a threat this group poses?
Well, right now, because of the circumstances in Kabul, the chaos, the opportunity for targets, and also, above all else, the difficulties in securing an area, this group does represent a high level of threat. We're understanding better now how they managed to pull off the attack on Thursday, and it really shows that they used the vulnerabilities on site to carry out their attack, and the chaos just keeps growing. Therefore, they're still in a position to be extremely threatening. You don't need high logistics. You know, this is really a small-scale attack in terms of preparation. Nonetheless, it has big consequences, and therefore the logistics required for such an attack create the conditions where this group can still be highly threatening.
Describe to us what drives ISK. What are they fighting for?
Well, they're fighting for what they consider to be the real Islam, the real Sharia, and this really differentiates them from the Taliban. They consider the Taliban to be a group that moved away from the real principles and values of Islam, and for them that view is not rigorous enough, and this is what they're pushing for. What needs to be understood with this group is that it does remain fairly small. This is not it can't be in terms of size or importance be compared to what we saw in the Middle East, whether in Syria or Iraq. But it's still a group that has a growing number of followers, that has a substantial regional network that allows it to grow and sustain itself. But it's a group that really tries to establish a new state according to its terms that are very different from what we understand to be a more radical view of Islam.
The US went to war in Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks to rout out al-Qaeda and destroy the Taliban. Do you see Afghanistan once again becoming a home for international terror groups?
Not Afghanistan per se. I think the interpretation or the perception of Afghanistan being this hub for terrorism is really difficult, because it's not just Afghanistan, it's the region as a whole. We know Pakistan for years was a hub for this. We know parts of Iran, parts of the other Central Asian states are conducive for this. So it's not just Afghanistan. Obviously, in a circumstance where a power, whether it's the Taliban or an official government, don't have full control over territory, that leaves gaps for groups, whether harmful or for something else, to grow and to become a threat. I think right now what we're focusing on and what we're seeing is that it'll be more of a regional threat, and then it could perhaps, because of the success of these groups, lead to something bigger. But in the short term, it's really more of a regional problem.
Jan St. Pierre, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Now, after a deployment lasting almost 2 decades and costing billions of euros, German troops have now left Afghanistan. As the troops return home, around 4,000 Afghans who were also brought to Germany are now facing the challenge of adapting to a new life. The government admits, though, that more than twice that number may have been left behind.
After almost 20 years in Afghanistan, the soldiers have come home. Germany's mission in the country was the toughest and longest the Bundeswehr has faced. The last part of it, the evacuation from Kabul, was the most dangerous. As the troops arrived at a military base near Hanover, the defence minister did not shy away from the tragedy on the ground. My first thoughts on this evening are directed at the victims of yesterday's appalling terrorist attack, both the civilian victims and, of course, especially our American comrades, with whom we carried out this operation side by side. I'm also thinking of those who are left behind in Kabul. We have said we will do everything we can to get them out of Kabul and out of Afghanistan in the coming weeks and months. German forces airlifted more than 4,000 Afghans from Kabul during their 11-day rescue operation. The final transport to land in Tashkent left the Afghan capital amid dramatic scenes, using an emergency takeoff procedure after terrorists attacked at the airport. Afghans reunited with family members at Frankfurt Airport are survivors of a dangerous escape. We were able to leave Kabul and catch the last flight out. The situation got worse and worse because of the crowds of people. There was a mass panic and shootings, and it was barely possible to get into the airport. The US airbase at Ramstein in Germany is hosting those trying to get to America. More than 18,000 have been processed here in recent days. Many of those have already boarded flights across the Atlantic, while others tell of the desperate journey to reach this point and of their plans for a new life.
Complete my study, which I can't able to study in Kabul, in Afghanistan. In war situation, the situation was very bad. I hope that I complete my study in United States.
Meanwhile, those Afghans who will remain in Germany are finding their way around their new home. They are the luckier ones. According to the government in Berlin, at least 10,000 Afghans entitled to come may still be in the country.